In this lecture, I am going to discuss with you the very first model of this course, which is the income expenditure model. This model came during the Great Depression of the late 1920s and the early 1930s in US, when there was a stock market crash and output fell significantly and unemployment also rose quite sharply. And the purpose of describing this model is to arrive at the self-sustaining level of GDP in an economy. Now, the self-sustaining level of GDP, when I say, what I mean is the level of GDP that is supported by the kind of different expenditure and income flows that takes place in an economy, and given the various kinds of income and expenditure that is taking place in an economy, what would be the level of GDP that will prevail in this economy, and if there is no exogenous factors taking place in this economy, this is the level of GDP which will replicate itself time and again or over time. Let us see how the GDP equilibrium GDP is decided in the economy through this model. In this model, we will exploit the fact that GDP can be seen from different perspectives, and we have already discussed that. GDP, we will see here how the GDP, when seen from the income side and from the expenditure side, means the same thing, and this fact we will exploit to arrive at the equilibrium GDP in an economy. And what we will do graphically, what I am doing, I am plotting the GDP both in the x-axis as well as on the y-axis, but the x-axis represent the income perspective of GDP, or the total income in the economy, whereas the GDP reflected on the y-axis is indicating the GDP from the expenditure side. And what are the different expenditures that we know takes place in an economy as per our broad classification? These were C, I, and G, and NX. And for the time being, let us consider it is a closed economy model, so that we don't have this NX component with us. If I take out the NX component, what I have got is C plus C, I, and G. Now, I need to tell how C, I, and G influence GDP at a particular time, and to arrive at the equilibrium income that will prevail in the economy, what we will do, we will assume in the beginning that let all these components of expenditure are determined exogenously. That means they are given from outside. They are not decided within the economy. In other words, we are saying that there is no behavioral relationship attached with all these components of expenditure. Now, suppose I say C is arbitrarily is given at say 200 rupees, I is given suppose say 300 rupees, and G, government spending, is suppose say 100 rupees. In this economy, so then C is 200, I is 300 rupees, G is 100 rupees. Now, how do I show that? If I have to show this, C is my 200 rupees, this is the C, and C, I am saying that it is constant, it is given, so it is C is equal to C bar, which is 200. I can show the I, which is 300, on the y-axis as, suppose this is I is equal to I bar, which is C was equal to C bar was 200, I was equal to I bar, suppose it is 300. So this is 200, this is 300. And suppose I have G, which is 100, government spending, because different components of expenditure are put here. I am explaining these numbers. I'm putting these numbers on the y-axis. Suppose this is my G is equal to G bar, which is given is 100. Now in this economy, so what happens if what is the total expenditure? That means C bar plus I bar, or if I say Y is equal to C plus I plus G, this I know from the expenditure side, this will be equal to say 300 plus say 200 plus 300. These are arbitrary numbers just to explain the concept. Now, if I add all this, how much it is? It is equal to 700. So, this will be somewhere around say 300, 400, 500, 600. Suppose this is my 700. Okay, and this is nothing but the C bar plus I bar plus G bar. Okay, now, this is the level of expenditure at which the level of expenditure in this economy is, say, 700 rupees. And I mean, like just this is an example, so it can be rupees lakhs crores, or or it could be in billion dollars. So, irrespective of the unit, I'm just trying to focus on the way, on the concept rather than on the units of measurement now. Now, how do I know that which level of GDP that will prevail in the economy? That I can get if I plot a 45-degree line. If I plot a 45-degree line, this is the 45-degree line. What it tells the equivalent on each point of this line, there is the x-axis and the y-axis is equidistance. So what is the significance of this 45-degree line? It tells that on each point of the line, there is same distance from x-axis as well as from y-axis. Now, if we see what does each point denotes? Each point denotes that GDP as measured by the income approach is equal to GDP measured by the expenditure approach. So, in other words, because at the equilibrium, what happens? Total income has to be equal to total expenditure. Now, there is another way of defining this. The Scandinavian school of economists, they talk about, they distinguish between two concepts, the ex ante and the ex post. Ex ante is telling us what is planned, and ex post tells what is realized. You may plan something, you may plan to save 500 rupees this month, but ultimately you may end up saving 300 rupees because you just felt like buying a audio CD or a video CD for 200 rupees, which was not earlier planned. So at the beginning of the month, when you had planned 500 rupees of savings, that was your ex ante savings. But what savings you actually undertook when you come to the end of the month, you found that it is only 300 rupees. So ex post savings were 300, but ex ante savings were 500. So in that sense, there is a difference between ex ante and ex post. The same applies to all concepts. We can look at each concept either from a ex ante sense or from a ex post sense. Now, um, so what it tells that in an exposed sense, each point on this line is a equilibrium point, because whatever has been spent, that much of income would have been generated, because somebody's expenditure is somebody else's income. This we have already discussed when discussing about the circular flow of income. So in a way, each point on this line tells that the total income is equal to total expenditure, and which should be the case in an economy if it is in equilibrium. As we said, equilibrium is the self-sustaining level of GDP, which repeats itself period after period when if there is no exogenous shocks to the economy. Now, if there is nothing is taking place in the economy, that, in other words, these are given from outside, in this kind of a economy, what would be the equilibrium level of GDP that would prevail? That we can get where the C, I and G line intersects the 45-degree line. These are all possible equilibrium points. Each point on the 45-degree line is a possible equilibrium point. But which of these possible equilibrium points will actually prevail, that will depend on the kind of or the total expenditure that is taking place in an economy. You will be able to appreciate the equilibrium income concept if you have not, maybe in the next 5 minutes when I give you some examples after showing the equilibrium point. In this example, what happens? The equilibrium income, the expenditure which is cutting the 45-degree line, that means at the point E, what I am finding, this distance is 700 crores or rupees 700, and this distance is also rupees 700. So at point E, if the economy operates at E, what we are finding, the total income generated in the economy is equals to total expenditure. And why we call it as a equilibrium income? Because if there is no change taking place in the economy from outside, this level of income will be produced year after year, period after period. Now, to appreciate that why E is the equilibrium point, and not a point like, suppose, say E1, which we had taken an example to show that each point on the 45-degree line is equidistant from x-axis and y-axis. So let us consider a point like E1, which is, if we are saying E is a point of equilibrium, certainly E1 cannot be an equilibrium point, and why E1 is not an equilibrium point, we can appreciate by looking at what is happening to the income and expenditure stream at point E1. If you see, at point E1, the income that is generated is in the economy is given by, say, this much. This is, suppose this is my y1, and or say, let us represent to have less confusion. We can say, suppose this was, say, 500. This point corresponded to 500, and at this point we are finding this is also 500. Now what happens at point E1? We are finding that the income generated in the production process through the production process is 500 only, but because we know that the expenditure that is taking place in the economy is given from outside and this is 700, what is happening is people are spending more than the income that is generated in the production process. How is it possible? And even if people are spending from where these goods are provided to them, this you can appreciate if you remember the concept of inventory when we discussed about investments, when we discussed about the GDP, concept of GDP. What we said, if you recall, we discussed that suppose a car manufacturer has produced 500 units of car, but he could sell only 300 units of car. The 200 units of car which could not be sold is considered as a part of inventory, and inventory is considered as a part of investment. So it will be assumed as if these 200 cars have been purchased by the car manufacturer himself. So what happens from a practical point of view, you suppose you are manufacturing refrigerators, and as a part of your normal business operation you are keeping an inventory to meet the immediate requirement of the wholesalers and the retailers. Now you are keeping say 1,000 units of refrigerators. This is what you plan, that it should 1,000 units of refrigerator should be in your inventory at each point at any point of time. But because people are willing to spend a lot more, 700 rupees worth of spending, people are willing to spend a lot more. What is happening, there is more demand for goods and services. In this case, suppose these refrigerators which you are selling or you are manufacturing, you find that brisk orders are being placed to you, and you are not able to meet the orders in the in the manner you would like to. Rather, because you are getting frequent orders, you are depleting or you are taking away stock from your inventory and meeting the market demand. So the 1,000 units of refrigerators that you had or you had planned in an ex ante sense actually turns out to be say only 300 units for you. So that means 700 units of additional refrigerators have been sold than what you had planned to sell. So what it when that happens, as a producer, what is the signal to you? The signal to you is, because sales are picking up faster, I need to expand my production. And when production is expanded, what happens? More income is generated in the production process. So what will happen at point E1, you are finding that the manufacturers are feeling the heat to to supply more of their goods, and which leads to increased production activity, and in the increased production activity generates additional income, and the process continues till you reach the level of 700 rupees of GDP. And at 700 rupees of GDP, or when production is taking place at such a level so that income of 700 rupees are generated, and this 700 rupees of income is matching the total expenditure that is occurring in this economy. And when production uh, takes place at a level that 700 rupees of income is generated, you find there is no further tendency for for the producers to expand production. Because if suppose in their zeal to because they have seen order books growing faster in the recent past, the producers try to overproduce, or in their zeal to produce more. Suppose they have purchased they have purchased more raw materials than what was needed, and and they eventually end up not producing goods worth 700 rupees, but goods worth, say, suppose 900 rupees. Now, when goods worth 900 rupees, when goods worth 900 rupees will be produced, when goods worth 900 rupees will be produced, what happens? The income generated in the production process is 900 rupees, but the income generated in the production process is 900 rupees, but what is the expenditure that takes place, or the expenditure required to adjust this income would be 900 rupees, but actual expenditure that is taking place in this economy is only 700 rupees. So what that leads to a situation where we find that, suppose you are finding yourself at point E2. At point E2, we are finding that firms have overproduced, but people are not willing to sell. So instead of 1,000 units of inventory, in this case at E1, the inventory had fallen to say 300 units. So market is giving a signal to the producer that you expand production. But when you are at E2, what is happening? You are getting a signal from the market that people are not willing to spend as much as you have produced. So this excess production ultimately gets reflected in unwanted inventory. So instead of 1,000 units of refrigerators, I'm taking the example of a individual manufacturer, but what is happening is so many production units are experiencing this. And just to keep things simple, I am taking the example of one unit and trying to show what is happening in the economy at a larger scale. So at E2, instead of this refrigerator producing unit, which wanted 1,000 units of refrigerators as inventory, it is finding that the refrigerators that now are inventory, because sales are not picking up. That is why, because people are not spending as much, the number of refrigerators now are, say, 2,000 units. Instead of 1,000 units in the inventory, there are 2,000 units of refrigerators in the inventory. Now, the normal inventory that the business had planned is 1,000 units, but it is finding itself with 2,000 units of refrigerators. Now, in this kind of a scenario, when your inventory is building up, sales are not picking up the way you would have liked it. Now, what is the signal you are getting to expand production or to cut back production? And a rational producer would take this signal that perhaps there is not adequate demand in the economy, and it would it is better that production capacity or production levels are reduced, so that the additional inventory is gradually adjusted. And and when you are going slow in production or not expanding production in the manner in which you were doing earlier, what it leads to a decline in, and when that is done by a vast number of production units, you find the the output to be gradually falling, and the output falls till the level of E, where again the total expenditure is equal to total income, so that the equilibrium is achieved. And what we just to reinforce what is meant by equilibrium in this context is that the that at point E, corresponding to 700 rupees worth of GDP, the economic activities are repeating themselves. There is neither a tendency for the producers to increase output or to reduce output, but if nothing takes place, no changes is occurring from outside in this economy, and nothing changes to the C, I, and G, then the economic activity will repeat itself at point E, and 700 rupees of GDP will be generated. Now, the key message from this model is that, as you would have marked, what is driving the equilibrium point, whether when it was E1 it was not at equilibrium, and it was at E2 it was not at equilibrium. Now only at E we are getting equilibrium, and this E point is decided by what, where the aggregate expenditure line is intersecting the 45-degree line, or the line of possible equilibrium points. So it is expenditure which is driving equilibrium in the economy. Now, if for some reason, suppose government spending increases from 100 to say 200. Now, if government spending increases from say G bar, which was 100, to 200, what will happen in this case? My Y will become Y1, it will become 200 plus 300 plus 200. This will give me how much? This will give me 800, and that means this aggregate expenditure, this was my aggregate expenditure, this aggregate expenditure now will be equal to C bar plus I bar plus G1 bar, whereas G1 bar is different from G bar by 100 units, and now your new equilibrium will be at, suppose, say E3. E3 is the new equilibrium point, and this new equilibrium point is decided by what? By the new level of aggregate expenditure. So the income expenditure model was used by Keynes to drive home the point that in an economy, ultimately it is the level of expenditure or the demand in the economy which drives the GDP to a particular level. The equilibrium income in an economy is decided by the total expenditure in an economy. Of course, this was a very simple model where we have taken C, I, G all as exogenous variables. Now, subsequently we will rather we will bring in behavioral relationship for these determinants of expenditure. By behavioral relationship I mean I will try to express C as a function of some of its primary determinants, or which factor drives consumption, that we will discuss, and the main driver of consumption when is brought into the analysis, how this, that means I will no more consider C as an exogenous variable but C as an endogenous variable which is decided from within the system. Now as far as the endogeneity of C is concerned, C depends, or C was nothing but our consumption expenditure, the household's consumption expenditure on goods and services. It could be government expenditure on consumer goods, consumables, like office stationaries, on purchase of petrol, a host of things which takes place on a day-to-day basis. Now, if we were to say, let us focus on consumption expenditure of households, you ask the question like, what drives consumption expenditure? Now, some of you may say it is interest rate which drives consumption. Yes, you are correct. Interest rate, but interest rate drives a particular kind of consumption which is called the discretionary consumption, which is sensitive to interest rate. Like suppose you are having already one house, you, because interest rates are so low, you don't mind taking another loan to buy another house as an investment, because, and why you are doing it, because cost of funds are very low. But if you ask people what is the primary determinant of consumption, it is their income level. If your income level is higher, you generally tend to be put into a higher consumption bracket. And as we have seen also in the Indian case, when people's income increased in the 2000s, you find that people's consumption pattern shifted to more protein based items. As discussed in the previous session, we would discuss now the equilibrium income, how it is determined when we do not consider all the determinants of aggregate expenditure as purely exogenous, but when we treat them as endogenous variables. And we will bring consumption as an endogenous variable, and consumption depends on what? Consumption is primarily governed by the income levels, and at an individual level, the income of a person decides his consumption levels, and at an aggregate level also we can say the total consumption depends on the total income in the economy. So if I will model C as a function of Y, and where C was my aggregate consumption is a function of the GDP, and how consumption is related to GDP, let us discuss about the consumption function a bit. We will discuss about the consumption function. The consumption function, which is C. We have seen that C is a function of Y, but what is the functional form it takes? That we can represent as C is equal to C0 plus BY, where each of these terms have their own significance. B is the slope of this consumption function. If we see it, if you know, it is represented as in the format of y is equal to mx plus c, which is the equation of a straight line. Now in the if I were to represent it as the equation of a straight line, how it would be, this would be c is equal to, say, this is my c0, this is 0, this is y, and if I plot c here, I will get, this will be my c0 plus by, and where b is nothing but the slope of this line c0 plus by. So what it tells that the c0, which is independent, you see there is no y term attached to c0. C0 is independent of the level of income. So in that sense, C0 is called as the autonomous consumption. Autonomous in the sense independent of the level of income. So people undertake some consumption even if when they don't earn an income. And how it is possible to support consumption when you are not having any income? It is primarily by dissaving, by selling some of your assets which you had earlier made your savings and had kept your savings in the form of financial assets or some other form of assets which you may be disposing of or selling to finance your current consumption. So C can be C is partly is the autonomous consumption, and the BY is called the induced consumption. This is the induced consumption, and this is the autonomous consumption. And induced in the sense, in what sense it is induced? It tells, induced in the sense when income changes, how your consumption responds to income. And by what factor consumption responds to income, that factor is given by B. B is nothing but the slope of this line, which is nothing but by del C by del Y. What it tells, it is the B, and B is telling me how much consumption changes if income changes by 1 unit in the margin. Because this is the interpretation of del C by del Y. When income changes by 1 unit, how much consumption is affected? Now, if B can be at best, what would be the value of B? Suppose somebody's income increases by say 100 units. Now, that additional 100 units of income can either be channelized into consumption, or a part of it can be saved. It need not be consumed. So if I am saying my total income can be disposed of either in consumption or in savings, now it is possible that suppose when a change in income takes place by del Y, suppose 100 units, then this must be allocated to either a change in consumption or a change in savings. Now del C can be maximum equal to del Y if del S is equal to 0. Now, if consider that extreme situation when del S is equal to 0, when del S is equal to 0 implies del C is equal to del Y. And this from this. Now, what does that mean? When del S is equal to 0, I have del C is equal to del Y, which gives me 1. So maximum B can be 1. And what would be the minimum value? It can be the other way around, that del C is 0 and the entire change in income is used for savings. So in that case, del C will be 0. It can be 0 by del Y, its value will be 0. So B will lie between 0 and 1, and and B is having a specific name. It is called the marginal propensity to consume. What the marginal propensity to consume, as you can see from the way it is described, it is the change in consumption occurring due to a change in income. And because you can consume the entire increase in income, B can be 1. You may decide not to use the increased income in consumption at all. In that case, B will be 0. Okay. let us try to get some more space here. Suppose if I am saying y is equal to c plus s, the way income is disposed of either in consumption or savings, del y will be equal to del c plus del s, and if I divide both sides by del y, what I will get? I will get del c by del y plus del s by del y, and we know this is this is our b, and this we can say this is our, if this was the marginal propensity to consume, this is nothing but the marginal propensity to save. How much of the additional income I am channelizing into savings, and this is del s by del y. So this was nothing but my marginal propensity to save. So this will give me del s by del y is nothing but, this was 1, so I will get 1 minus b. So if b is the marginal propensity to consume and del s by del y is the marginal propensity to save, the relationship I am getting is MPS is equal to 1 minus MPC, which can also be written as MPC plus MPS is equal to 1. This is the same equation put in a different way, this part. Then the 1 is coming from here, and this is the MPC and this is the MPS. So please see, please remember this, and we will, the significance of the marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save, we will see very soon, maybe in the next session. But now coming back to our determination of equilibrium income when consumption is endogenously decided, let us try to arrive at that. So what we have said, is this visible? Yeah. So this is, let us draw it more straight. This was my, suppose this was my consumption function, which was C0 plus By, and my investment and government spending, suppose I still assume them to be exogenously given. Okay, suppose I assume them to be given exogenously, and this is, suppose my, this is G bar, this is I bar, and this was the C0 0, and I have Y here, or just to not to have confusion, let us have GDP here by the income method, and here we are portraying GDP by the expenditure method. Okay. Now this is whether it is visible or not. This is my, I am representing GDP here. This is nothing but the GDP on this axis. Okay, and this is GDP by expenditure method, which is C, I, and G, and still it is a closed economy. Now, if I suppose this is the consumption function, this is the investment function, and this is the government spending. If what is the aggregate spending in this economy? Aggregate spending we know is equal to C plus I plus G. In this case, it was C0 plus By plus I was, suppose, I bar, and G was G bar. Okay. Now, if I add all this, what would happen? This curve will shift by the amount of I bar and G bar. So what it would lead to, I will get a curve something like this, a parallel shift of the consumption function by the amount of I0 and or I bar and G bar. So here I am getting C, my intercept changes from C0 to C0 plus I bar G bar, and this is my new aggregate expenditure line. okay, which is nothing but this. Now if I want to, now let us plot the 45-degree line. Okay, suppose this is the 45-degree line. Suppose this is the 45-degree line. Actually this is not 45 degree, this would be a 45 degree. Okay, so if this is the 45-degree line, I will find the intersection takes place at a point like this. So this is, so this is the point what is happening. This is the 45-degree line, so this is the equilibrium point E. I am getting where the 45-degree line intersects the aggregate expenditure line. Okay, what is the significance? Everything remains same as we have already discussed, but the interpretation is the same. Like if you are at a point like E1, what happens? The income that is generated in the production process is only Y1, but the expenditure that people are willing to incur at this at E1 level of income is much higher, and which is given by this point. Suppose this is Y2. Now expenditure expenditure is Y2, which is higher than the income, which is Y1. And what happens when the expenditure is more than income? People are willing to spend more than than what is produced. This would lead to what? It would lead to a depletion of inventory and an increase in production until you reach the point E. Likewise, if production has taken place more than Y at Y2, but the expenditure correspondingly is not suppose let us consider it as Y3. So your if income generated is Y3, then expenditure which would support this level of income would be how much? The expenditure which is corresponding to this point Y3 is much higher. The income that is generated in the production process is Y3, but expenditure is stuck up at Y3, but which should be ideally at a much higher level, okay, at a much higher level of say Y4. In other words, now expenditure is falling short of the required expenditure to support this higher level of income. So, and that means adequate expenditure is not taking place in the economy to support this high level of income which is being generated or the output that is being produced. So that will ultimately lead to what? Accumulation of unwanted inventory, which sends a signal to producers to cut down production, and we will be moving from say suppose this was my E2. From E2 I will be, suppose this was uh, on the 45-degree line. We are talking about the 45-degree, like say E2. Now you will be moving down till you get to point. So the short point is, when we bring in endogeneity of consumption, we found that again it is the total expenditure which is driving the entire system to a particular level of GDP, and and this model will be quite handy to discuss about the importance of fiscal policy